Hello and welcome, friends. Today we are going to discuss experiments. Up till now, in data collection, we have discussed the types of data, primary and secondary data. Then we discussed surveys as one method of collection of data, and we discussed the various types of surveys that are there. Apart from that, we compared these different types on various counts. Then we also had a brief discussion on in-depth interviewing, which is used with exploratory research design. Then we talked about the factors which determine the choice of method. Then we moved on to observations, which is another method of collection of primary data. And we talked about the various approaches which are there. And then we did a comparison of surveys and observations, you would remember. Now, today is the time for us to discuss experiments, which are another method of collecting primary data. You would recall that in our discussion on research designs, and more specifically on our discussion in our discussion about the causal research design, we had said that experiments are used with causal research design, and we had discussed the experiments in quite a detail there. So we are not going to take up the same thing again. You can always go back to that particular lecture where we discuss research designs and go through the things that we had discussed there. Today I'm going to talk about those aspects which we were not able to touch upon there. So if you would recall that experiments are generally used with causal research design, and in experiments we try to determine the relationship between independent variable and the dependent variable. You would recall that we have discussed all the three types of variables, that is IV, DV and extraneous variables there. And we have seen that the variables between which we want to find relationship, one of those variables is called the independent variable, which in essence is the cause, and the one which is the effect of the cause is called the dependent variable. All other variables which can also impact the dependent variable are called extraneous variables. Now, how do we conduct experiments? Basically, we manipulate the independent variables. We bring about a change in the value of the independent variable, and if there's a relationship between independent variable and dependent variable, when you change the value of independent variable, naturally there would be a change in the value of the dependent variable. So we look at the impact on the dependent variable whenever there's a change in the independent variable. So by manipulation of independent variable, we mean changing of the values of the independent variable, and we keep on tracking the impact on the dependent variable, keep on recording the noting down the impact on the dependent variable once we change the independent variable. But while doing this, we have to ensure that the extraneous variables are fully controlled, because otherwise they can also impact the dependent variable, and if they also start impacting the dependent variable, we would not be able to come to a conclusive idea about the relationship between independent variable and dependent variable. So we need to control the extraneous variables. Extraneous variables are also known by the two other terms. One is the confounding variable and the other one is the intervening variable. So these things which we have already discussed there, we are just doing a recapitulation here. So the bottom line is that you manipulate the independent variable, you bring about changes in IV, then you keep noting down the changes which are affected by this change in IV, and while doing this you control the extraneous variables. Now there are different types of experimental designs. We are going to discuss just one, which is called the one group pre-test and post-test design. We'll understand what this mean. You please have a look at the example. If you are trying to measure the pain sensation of a subject before and after applying Dettol, now who is the subject? I told you, whenever you are going for surveys, the person from whom you are seeking response is called the respondent. But when you go for observations or experimentation, the entity on whom you are conducting an experiment, or the entity who you are observing, that particular entity is called the subject. So here the subject is the entity on which you are conducting the experiment. Okay, now we need to understand what we are doing in this particular example. Please understand, we are measuring the pain sensation of a subject before and after applying Dettol. So how is this being done? Please understand, we have asked some interested subjects to please to kindly come in, and then we are conducting an experiment on them. We will give them some kind of a cut on their skin, and then we will record their pain sensations. Once this has been recorded, we will apply Dettol, and then again we will record the pain sensation felt by these subjects. And this way we can understand whether using Dettol on the cut, does it increase the pain sensation or does it reduce the pain sensation. What is the independent variable here? The independent variable is the application of Dettol. When you are applying Dettol, so whether Dettol is applied or not is the independent variable, and the dependent variable is the sensation. Is this okay? Now why is this called one group pre-test and post-test design? Please understand, before the treatment, now what do we mean by treatment? Treatment means the application of the independent variable, or here applying the Dettol. Before applying the Dettol, we took readings of the pain sensation, so that was the pre-test data. And once the Dettol has been applied, we again noted down the pain sensation, that was the post-test data. And since we conducted this experiment on the same subjects, on the same group of subjects, that is why it is called one group pre-test and post-test design. Through this particular experimentation, we can find out whether applying Dettol reduces, increases, or does it have any effect or does it not have any effect on the pain sensation. Pain sensation becomes the dependent variable while applying Dettol becomes the independent variable. But now please understand, while doing this particular experiment, you have to ensure that extraneous variables are controlled. So all other things which can impact the pain sensation have to be controlled. For example, if the subject consumes some kind of a pill that reduces the sensation of pain, which we call a painkiller. So if the subject consumes a painkiller, if he takes a painkiller, naturally the pain sensation will be reduced. Now this becomes an extraneous variable, because use of painkiller will also reduce pain sensation or will also have an impact on the pain sensation, which is the dependent variable. So what we will do, we will control for this particular extraneous variable. We will ensure that none of our subject consumes any painkiller. So this is how we control the extraneous variables or the confounding variables or the intervening variables. Now let us talk about two different types of experiments. The first type is called the laboratory, the other one is called the field experiment. Now please understand, laboratory does not mean laboratory. Laboratory basically means in controlled settings, while field experiments, they are conducted under natural conditions. They are conducted in natural settings, while laboratory experiments are conducted under artificial or controlled settings. So that is the main difference. So don't assume that field means going to field and then conducting experiment. The only thing is in natural settings, how things happen naturally. So we will conduct our experiments in natural settings, then it will become field experiments. If we are conducting it under some kind of a controlled environment, then it will become a laboratory experiment. Okay, so now let us discuss some of the attributes and let us compare the laboratory and the field experiments on those attributes. Attribute number 1, look at the column number 1 and row number 2. Simulation of actual environment. What do we mean by simulation? Simulation means creating an exact copy of something. So you understand, where are we simulating the actual environment? Is it in the laboratory or is it in the field? Basically it is in the field. We are simulating the actual environment. So field experiments are being conducted in natural settings, so they are simulating the actual environment, while laboratory experiments are being conducted under controlled artificial setting. So it is not a close approximation of how things would happen in the actual environment. So that has been shown here. Laboratory experiments, they rank low in terms of simulation of actual environment, while field experiments rank higher in terms of simulation of actual environment. Now let's have a look at the second attribute, which is the extraneous variable. Now what happens with an extraneous variable when we are conducting the laboratory experiments? I told you laboratory experiments means we are conducting the experiment in controlled settings. So naturally we would be controlling better for the extraneous variable. It would be easier for us to control extraneous variables, while in natural settings it will be difficult, relatively more difficult for us to control the extraneous variables. Let us talk about the third attribute, which is the relationship between IV and DV. Now please understand, in laboratory experiments you are controlling the extraneous variables, so naturally the relationship that you obtain between IV and DV is relatively more pure. It is not impacted by extraneous variables because extraneous variables were controlled, so the relationship is more accurately established. While in field experiments, since they were conducted in natural settings, you are not able to control for all the extraneous variables, so naturally it will be difficult for you to establish pure IV-DV relationship. You would not be able to have an estimation of the IV-DV relationship in as precise or as accurate as a manner as in laboratory experiments. While in laboratory experiments you would be able to establish this relationship more accurately, more precisely. Now let us talk of generalizability. What do we mean by generalizability? Basically generalizability means whether what we have done and what results we have obtained while conducting an experiments, are they generalizable to the real world? Would we obtain the same kind of results in the real world? Now please have a look. In laboratory experiments you were able to control extraneous variables, but would you be able to control extraneous variables? Are these extraneous variables under control in the real world also? No, they are not. They also impact the IV-DV relationship. So the relationship which you obtain here in laboratory experiments may not be generalizable in the real world, because in laboratory experiments you were able to control extraneous variables, while in the real world extraneous variables are also going to play a role. On the other hand, in field experiments you were not able to control the extraneous variables as effectively as in laboratory experiment. So the relationship that you obtain between IV and DV would be closer to the real world relationship, because in real world also extraneous variables play a role, just like they have played a role in the field experiments, because you are not able to control them, so they impacted the IV-DV relationship, and the same thing would happen in the real world. So as far as generalizability is concerned, field experiments have a higher generalizability than the laboratory experiments. So what you achieve through field experiments is going to be closer to real world phenomena than what you achieve through your laboratory experiments. Now let us talk about the fifth and the last attribute: time, cost and labor required. So you would know that in laboratory experiments, because you are controlling for the extraneous variables, so you would be able to derive a relationship between IV and DV relatively more quickly, and that is why much less time, cost and labor would be consumed in laboratory experiments. While in field there are extraneous variables to take care of, there are so many things to take care of, and that is why it is going to be more difficult for you to conduct the field experiments. Apart from that, in laboratory experiments the whole experiment is under your control. You may not have to repeat the experiment again and again, while in field experiments is not everything is under control. You may have to repeat it also, and plus you will have to go to the actual field to conduct the experiment. It is going to be more time consuming, costlier and more labor intensive also. Now let us have a look at one more technique through which you collect the primary data, and that particular technique is called the focus group. Now what happens in a focus group? Let's have a look. There's a moderator, and then there is a group which comprises of 10 to 15 participants, and then there is a moderator. Now please understand, these participants are invited, and suppose if I'm trying to find out whether my customers would like this particular product or not. Let's say I'm about to bring a new product in the market, and I want to do this research whether the customers would like it or not, or what are the shortcomings in this particular product that I'm bringing to the market. What will I do? I'll invite some of my prospective customers to this discussion, and they would be asked to join this discussion as participants, and then there would be one moderator. We'll understand the role of moderator in a little while from now. Now please understand, the discussion would take place, and this discussion would revolve around a central theme. There would be a main theme, the main focus of this discussion, and the whole discussion will have to revolve around that particular main theme. There could be some sub themes related to that main theme also, subtopics related to same the central theme, and the discussion will have to revolve around that central theme and the relevant sub themes only. And the discussion will be a freewheeling discussion for about an hour. At times it could continue for longer, for maybe 1.5 or 2 hours also. At times it could be at times 45 minutes also, but it is a detailed discussion wherein the participants are absolutely free to voice their opinion, to express their opinion, to express their views. There is simply no bar on any of the participants, so they are free, and that is why we are saying that this is going to be a freewheeling discussion. uh, Now let us understand one thing. Whenever there is a freewheeling discussion, there is a danger of the discussion of the participants digressing from the central theme. It may so happen that they have been invited to discuss the new product that I am bringing to the market, and the pros and the cons and the shortcomings and the good attributes of that particular product. But it may so happen that they might soon start discussing the COVID-19 problem. So this would be a digression from the main theme. Now this is the role of the moderator. He has to ensure that the participants stick to the central theme. They don't digress. And that is why we have kept a moderator also, who is basically is a collaborator of the researcher. He is collaborating with the researcher, and researcher has given him the guidelines that the discussion should focus on this particular central theme and the related topics only. So whenever the participants are digressing, the job of the moderator is to bring them back to the central theme. Is this okay? But please understand, moderator is not there to express his own views. Moderator is just there to ensure that the participants stick to the central theme of the discussion. Now, how does the analysis takes place in the focus group? See, whatever the participants are speaking up, whatever they say, everything is recorded, and then transcripts are prepared. What is a transcript? Transcript is simply converting the audio into text. So whatever they have spoken, that has been recorded using a tape recorder or something like that, and then we write it down actually. So for example, what participant 1 has said, so we'll write down participant 1 said this, then let's say participant 2 interjected in between, so I'll write this down also, participant 2 interjected. If let's say a participant paused while speaking out a sentence, he has paused in between, so I'll also mention that in my transcript. So transcript is nothing, whatever they have said, we are putting it down into a text form, and that is what a transcript is all about. So this is how analysis is done. We are not only listening to what they are saying. As researcher, we are not only listening to what the participants are saying during the focus group, but we are also interested in noting down, in preparing transcripts. Why? So that we can analyze these transcripts later on. Apart from that, there is also a one-way mirror through which the researcher or the observer can observe the participants, but the participant cannot see the researcher. So that is why it's called a one-way mirror. Why is this required? Because many times you have seen this and you have read about this earlier also. Body language is also a cue to what an individual is thinking. Body language is also a means of communication, and you can fake your responses, but you cannot fake your body language. Is this okay? So why there is a one-way mirror? So that the researcher can observe the participants while they are something saying something, and in the meanwhile he can also observe their body language, because that is an additional cue to understand their real feelings or their real motives or real desires. Okay, now what is done through the analysis, what basically we are trying to find out through the analysis is we are trying to find out whether there is some common pattern emerging from the discussion. What do we mean by a common pattern emerging? Almost every participant, or yeah, majority of participants are saying the same thing. This is one common pattern which is emerging, or maybe all of them are saying, okay, they are pointing out a particular attribute as not being up to the mark. For example, most of the participants might be pointing out at the flavor. They might be saying, no, the flavor is not good. So that is a common pattern which is emerging from the discussion, or some dominant viewpoint that is emerging from the discussion, which is the majority point of view emerging from the discussion. So based on what they are saying, based on what the focus group members are saying, and based on the transcripts that we have prepared from what they have said, and based on the analysis of those transcripts, and based on the uh, analysis of the body language that they are emanating, we can understand what are the common patterns in their responses, and this can give me an idea whether they like my product or not, whether they feel that a particular attribute is not up to the mark or not, or whether they are satisfied with my product or not, because that will ultimately help me improve my product and then launch it into the market. Okay, now we are moving on to the next thing. What are the new trends? Let us talk about some other variants of focus groups. There are some variants also. Please understand that in a focus group, what happens is many a times the participants who are more talkative, who are more assertive, they are able to express their point of view. But the ones who are more submissive, they are less assertive, they're less confident about themselves, or maybe they're less forthcoming, they would not be able to express their views. And this is one major drawback with the focus group. So for that we have come up with a variant which is called a nominal group technique. Now what happens? Nominal means only in name, naam matra. So what is a nominal group? Again, we have got 10 to 15 participants, but they would not be interacting with each other as people interact in a group, and that is why it is going to be called a nominal group. How we will conduct the nominal group, please understand. The participants would be invited to the discussion, and then we, now please understand, there is no interaction is going to take place between any of the participants. What will happen, we'll collect the point of view from the first participant, likewise individually, and they are all sitting in different places, so they are not getting an opportunity to interact with each other. Then we go to the second participant, likewise collect his opinion, third, fourth, fifth, and so on and so forth. Now once we have collected the opinions of all the participants, what we'll do, we'll go back again to the first participant and tell him that this is what the other group members are saying, that the other participants are saying. Participant number 2 is saying this, participant 3 is saying this, participant, in the light of this knowledge, in the light of these facts, would you want to revise your opinion? And it may so happen that the participant 1 might want to revise his opinion. Then we'll collect the revised opinion again. Then we'll go to again participant 2, we'll tell him, okay, the other participants were saying this, participant 1 said this, participant 3 said this, would you want to revise his opinion? And then again we'll collect the revised opinion, and this way we will have multiple rounds until unless we approach some kind of a unanimity. We approach a situation where most of the participants are unanimous on a particular point, or their opinions overlap with each other. So we'll continue till that point of time. This is called a nominal group technique. Now here in the advantages, the ones who are less assertive, less confident of themselves, they also get an opportunity to speak out without worrying about the response of the other participants. So that is an advantage, and that is why we use the nominal group technique. The other variant is the telephonic discussion or the video conferencing. The telephonic discussion at times is also called the audio conferencing, wherein the participants are, they don't need to be present physically at a particular place for the discussion to take place. They can be seated at their respective locations, and then they would be connected through information technology tools through video conferencing, and this manner they would be discussing the whatever topic has been given to them. The topic would be discussed like this. So basically it's some kind of a virtual group discussion where the participants are not actually physically present, but they are uh, being connected, making use of IT tools, and this is how the discussion will take place. Okay, now, so let us take an example of how and why focus groups are used in many places, specifically in the entertainment world. Nowadays what happens is, before a particular movie or before a particular uh, um, let's say before a particular serial is being telecasted, what happens is many times the producers do what, they do a pre-screening, pre-release screening for the audience. So some members from the audience are invited before the movie or the play is actually being released on TV or in cinema halls. Before that, they're invited for a pre-release screening, wherein the participants are shown the movie, and once the movie has been shown, they are asked to give their feedback, and that feedback is then incorporated and modifications done in the movie. So this is how focus group is also used in the entertainment world. Okay, now let us move over to the other method of collecting primary data, and which is a very creative method of collecting primary data. This method basically is the use of projective techniques. Now why do we use projective techniques? Let me give you a small background. See, many times when you go to a respondent and ask him questions which uh, may be seeking sensitive information from him, he is likely to give you a response which is not truthful response. He may hide some information from you. He may not disclose his feelings completely. So these kind of issues are always there in a survey, and this is one particular lacuna that we are trying to take care of by introducing, by making use of projective techniques. How? Let us have a look. What happens in projective techniques is, respondents, they project their feelings on unstructured situations. What do we mean by unstructured situations? You have heard about unstructured questionnaires, we have discussed that. Unstructured situations are those situations which do not have one ideal response. For example, I'll show you a picture which is very, very hazy. You cannot make out anything of it. So it will depend on you what you make out of it. If I'm asking you to interpret that picture, somebody might interpret it as two children playing cricket. Somebody else might interpret it as two trees. Some third person might interpret it in a very, very different manner. So there is no particular ideal response, and that is why that situation is called an unstructured situation. And respondents do what? Respondents basically, they are asked to interpret that particular, in the example that I've taken of the very, very hazy picture. So they have to interpret what that picture is, what that picture is showing, what that picture is depicting. So while they are doing this, basically, since the picture in itself does not have any meaning because it's very hazy, it does not have a meaning of its own. So whatever the respondent says is basically his own feeling projected onto the picture. That is why it is, these kind of techniques are called projective techniques. The respondent projects his own feeling on somebody else. It could be a picture, it could be some cartoon, it could be some other character. So he's projecting his own feelings on maybe a character, maybe a cartoon, maybe a picture. And since he is projecting his feelings onto them, he feels that he is not talking for himself, he is talking for that particular character in the cartoon or for that picture. And in this sense he feels more comfortable because he is not talking about himself, and so his defenses are lowered. Now he is more open to talk about sensitive information about himself, because he feels that he is not talking for himself, he is talking for some other character, or he is talking for some cartoon. So he is more open, and he will be able to, he is more open to disclosing his feelings. And that is why projective techniques score over surveys. Now let us have a detailed understanding, and you will get to know what projective techniques are all about. So as I've said, since the respondent is not answering in the first person, he is not saying, okay, I feel this. He's saying the picture says this or the character says this. So he is less inhibited, and he feels less inhibition against revealing his deepest feelings. And that is why we generally go for projective techniques when we want to find out some sensitive piece of information, when we want to unearth some sensitive piece of information or hidden desires or motives from our respondents. Now let us talk about examples, and then you'll be able to understand what projective techniques are all about. Story completion. Now what will happen in a story completion? The first two lines of a story would be given. Let us do what? Let us take an example. Suppose I want to find out how people like my product. Let's say I'm the marketer of Dettol, and I want to find out what people think when they are using my Dettol brand of antiseptic liquid. So one way of doing this is by simply asking them, conducting a survey. But in survey they may not disclose their hidden or deepest motivations, desires. So I might go for a projective technique. How? Let us see. In story completion, what will I do? I will give my story. Abraham, an individual in the age group of 2022, pursuing his BBA degree from a government institute in Uttarakhand, is using Dettol on the bruise that he just got while playing a football match. After applying the Dettol, and then I'll, what will happen? These are the initial sentences which start the story, and then I leave the space blank for my respondent to respond. Now he'll have to complete the story. What happens after applying the Dettol? Now please understand what is happening. Basically, the respondent is projecting his feeling on Abraham, about whom the story has been given. So basically, number one, since he is projecting his feelings on Abraham, this is projective technique. And number two, since he is not talking for himself, he is not speaking for himself, he is speaking for some other character, Abraham, he feels less inhibited about expressing his deepest feelings and motivations. Okay, so this is example of story completion. Likewise, there can be some kind of a sentence completion exercise also, wherein the sentence could be like this: yesterday I got some bruises while playing football, and I applied Dettol on them. Dot 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 dot. Now the sentence will have to be completed by the respondent. Another variant could be the third person technique, wherein the respondent has to talk in third person. What do we mean by third person? See, you would remember from your knowledge of English grammar, first person is I, second person is you, and third person is they, he, she, her. So third person means what? He has to narrate a story in the third person. So he will write down a story. Abraham applied Dettol on his bruise. Dot dot dot. Now he will be filling up the blank space. So he'll be talking for a third person, and that is why it's called a third person technique. And he's projecting his feelings on that third person, Abraham. Word association test. If I want to find out how he feels after applying, let's say, Dettol. So what will I do? I will give him a list of words, and I won't give him much time so that he can, because I want to find out his topmost, what is the topmost feeling in his mind. How does he feel about me? And I don't want him to think too much. So what will I do? I'll give him a list of words. It could be 10 or 15 words. And against every single word, he has to give me a response according to the first word that comes to his mind. So 10 to 15 words are there. So whenever a word is there, he has to give me any response, whatever comes to his mind. Clear? In between this, in middle of this list, somewhere my brand name Dettol would also be there. So for example, it could be like this: knife. He would say, he would respond to knife. There is, the first word is knife, then the second word is, let's say, alphabet, third word is Amir Khan, fourth word is, let's say, cricket, fifth word is now is Dettol, and so on. The list would be there, and for every single word he'll have to respond in by speaking out a word. So this will give me an idea what is the first thing that comes to his mind when he gets to know about Dettol, or when he sees Dettol, or when he uses Dettol. So this is what a word association test is all about. Then we have a cartoon test wherein we show a cartoon character. Now this would be, a picture form of the story completion test. Here what will I show? Show a person who has just got hurt while playing football in form of a cartoon, and he's applying Dettol, and then he's thinking something. So the respondent will have to write down what that particular character is thinking. So this is called the cartoon test. So the respondent will basically be projecting his own feelings on that particular cartoon. The last one is called the photo sort, wherein if I want to find out how he feels after applying Dettol, I will show him 10 different pictures. One picture shows ice, for example, the other melting ice, the other picture, let us say, it shows um fire raging in a forest, a forest fire. Third picture shows uh, water, let's say. Fourth picture shows, let's say, um thorns, kante, and so on and so forth. I'll show him picture, and then what will I say, which picture would you select if I say Dettol? So when I tell him Dettol, which picture would you want to select? So if he selects the melting ice picture, it would mean that probably Dettol gives him that kind of a sensation, melting ice, cooling sensation. On the other hand, if he selects a picture which is showing the raging fires in a forest fires, then probably Dettol gives him burning sensation. So this way I can unearth the deepest feelings, hidden feelings and hidden desires of the respondent. So that is called a photo sort. Okay, so these are some of the projective techniques that we use, but then the problem with these kind of techniques is you need some expert to interpret the response of the respondent. So what does the respondent mean? That has to be interpreted, and for that you need an expert. For example, if in my last example, let us say, if the respondent picks up a picture which shows raging fires, forest fires, then what exactly does it mean? So that has to be interpreted, for which you need an expert researcher, or some expert is required to interpret what the respondent means. So this is one basic problem with the projective techniques. And then there is one more issue connected with this particular problem, that you need to be a researcher with good amount of expertise, because you need to interpret what the respondent means. So the responses have to be interpreted, and that is why you need an expert researcher. Otherwise it is going to be difficult for you to interpret what the respondent is thinking. But that is, now this problem does not come up in surveys, because if in surveys he says, okay, I am this much satisfied with Dettol, how satisfied are you with Dettol? Rate Dettol on 1 to 5, 5 highly satisfied, 1 least satisfied. And if he says, okay, 4, then I can interpret it, and anybody can interpret. No expertise is required. But to interpret the responses in projective techniques, you require people with good experience and background at times in psychology also. So that is one lacuna of projective techniques, but still projective techniques are used because they give us an idea about they help us get to the deepest they help us unearth the deepest desires, deepest motivations of our respondent, which is just not possible through observations at times and through surveys also. So that is the value of projective techniques as far as collection of primary data is concerned. Okay. Now the last portion which is left is we have completed the various methods through which we collect primary data. Now we are moving over to secondary data sources, and let us talk about some of the sources which are there in secondary data which we can go for to collect secondary data. You would remember that secondary data is the data that has already been collected by somebody else for his or her own research purpose, and we are simply borrowing that data from him. In that sense, it is much more efficient in terms of the time that needs to be spent and in terms of the money that it requires. Much more efficient, but it may not be very relevant to my research. That is a lacuna of secondary data. But here let us discuss some of the secondary data sources. Number one, internal database of the firm. For example, if I am Big Bazaar, people come and buy various products, and every time they buy my products, um, when they check out, uh, I keep a record of all these things, what all things they have bought, and I also keep a record of the phone numbers, and this way I can create my own internal database of which kind of customer is buying what on which days of the week, and what is the average amount of money that he spends every time he comes to Big Bazaar. So all this can be for part of my internal database which you can use for your own research. So internal database of the firms can be used. Then we have firms annual reports, executive speeches, and financial statements. So if you want to find out what is it that Maruti is going to do in 2025, rather than conducting my own, collecting my own primary research, but primary data, what I can do is I can look at their annual reports, what the executives are, CEOs and MDs are saying, and look at the financial statements. Have they started investing in more in R&D or not? So this will give me an idea about what Maruti is planning to do in 2025. So that is another example of secondary data sources. Then you can always purchase internal database from other firms. For example, Facebook has a database. It records the browsing habits of the users, and then also records their likes and dislikes depending on which photographs do they like and what all comments do they make, and based on that they create a database of the probable customer profile, what kind of customer an individual is, and then they sell this particular data to the various marketing firms. So this is an example of secondary data source, Facebook's database of user browsing patterns. This you can use to sell your own products. So if you know that a particular user has been liking pictures showing cars, so probably this is a clue to me that this customer is interested in cars. He already might have purchased a car, he might be looking to switch over to a better car, or he might be looking to purchase his first car. So for me, as Maruti Suzuki India Limited or maybe Hyundai, this is a good piece of information. Now there are trade bodies also which publish data. For example, you know that Confederation of Indian Industries, FICCI, Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industries, and likewise SIAM is a body of automobile manufacturers of India. So these organizations also keep on bringing their own databases, bringing their own data, and that can act as a data source for us. Then government publications are there. Reserve Bank of India is there. We have got economic surveys. Just before the budget, government comes up with the economic survey. Then CMIE is also there. You can have a detailed look. Then, as syndicated data research firms, the job of these syndicated data research firms is to collect data, and then they sell this data to whosoever is interested in this data. So they will collect this data on their own, and then they will sell this data to companies. For example, there are syndicated data research firms like Linsel India or IMRB. So they collect their own data, and then if you are interested in this data, they will sell it to you. So you can also uh, buy this data from syndicated data research firms like these. So this again would be a secondary source of information, secondary data source for you. Now these are the various secondary data sources. With this we have come to the end of this particular topic, wherein we had to discuss the data collection methods. We started with a difference between primary and secondary data, and now we have discussed observations, surveys, experiments, projective techniques, and some other few other techniques through which we collect primary data. Now in the next video lecture we shall move on to another aspect that is again very important, which is basically about sampling. My advice to you is to please go through all my video lectures on data collection methods and be ready for a test which will take place very soon. Thank you very much for your attention. Hope you enjoyed this video lecture. Goodbye.